If you hear crying in the mountains, it's either a ghost or someone God hasn't given up on yet. The wind howled like a starving animal. Snow didn't fall, it attacked. It came sideways in hard biting sheets, stinging every inch of skin it found. Elias Redfern pulled his fur collar tighter against his jaw and urged his mare forward through the storm. Bitterroot winters didn't give second chances. They killed quickly and quietly. He had been out checking his trap lines before the storm turned from bad to mean. That was his mistake. Up here, mistakes got you buried under the pines. The world was white and spinning. Even the sound of hooves was swallowed whole. Somewhere between the timberline and the river bend. Elias felt the mountain shift under him, not literally, but in that old way it had, like a beast rolling in its sleep. The hair on his arms prickled. He knew what that meant. Someone or something was out there. Then it came, faint at first, a sound you could mistake for a fox caught in a snare. A cry, thin, high, and desperate. A child's cry. Elias froze. The wind bit through his coat, but he stayed still, squinting into the white curtain. It came again, farther upslope. Damn, he muttered under his breath. He almost turned away. The storm was worsening. One more hour and he'd be fighting to keep his own lungs from icing. But conscience, that old stubborn mule, dug in its hooves. If he walked away, he'd hear that cry in his head every night until spring. He clicked his tongue and steered the mare toward the sound. The storm swallowed the trail almost instantly. Branches clawed at him. The air burned. He pushed forward anyway. Through the veil of snow, a shape emerged, an overturned wagon half buried in drifts, its wheels still spinning slow like the hand of a dying clock. The canvas top was shredded to ribbons, and there, crouched beside a motionless figure, was a boy. His arms were wrapped tight around an older woman's body. Her face was pale skin, stiffening in the cold. The boy's eyes were wide and black, his mouth cracked from the wind. "Help," he screamed, the word whipped away by the blizzard. Elias dismounted fast. The snow came up to his knees. The woman was barely breathing. Her pulse faint, but there. The boy clung tighter when Elias leaned down, his small frame shaking uncontrollably. "She won't wake up," he sobbed. "Don't let her die." "Easy," Elias rasped. His voice was rough from years of silence. "She's still here. Hold on." He hoisted the woman up, too light, too cold, and set her over his saddle. She made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a ghost's breath. Elias swung the boy up behind him and shoved the mare's flank with a firm heel. The wind hit them like a wall. His cabin was still a mile away. In this weather, it might as well have been 10. "Hold on to me, kid," Elias shouted. The boy buried his face in Elias's back, whispering something in a language the mountain man didn't understand. A prayer, maybe, or a promise. Snow blurred everything, sky, trees, breath. Elias focused on each step of the mare. Forward, forward, forward. The cabin's smokehouse came into view like a miracle carved out of white. When he finally kicked open the door, the warmth slapped him in the face. He carried the woman straight to the bed. The boy hovered near the stove, trembling, but refused to sit. Elias stripped off his gloves, lit the fire higher, and checked her ankle, swollen but not broken. Frostbite along the edges, but she'd live. He melted snow in a tin cup and added crushed willow bark. The smell of bitter medicine filled the one-room cabin. When he lifted the cup to her lips, the woman's eyes fluttered open. Sharp. Alert. She wasn't just some half-dead traveler. There was steel behind those pupils. "Thomas," she rasped. The boy rushed forward. "I'm here, Grandma." She exhaled slowly, a sound like the storm losing its grip outside. Elias tried to ease her back down when she shifted to sit up. Easy. You'll tear something. Who are you, Elias Redfern? She scanned the cabin quickly, every corner, every shelf, the rifle over the mantel. A survivor's eyes. Where are we, she asked. Bitterroot Ridge. My land. Her brows knit. We're in your debt. It's not debt, Elias said gruffly. Just what's right. He set a pot of venison stew on the stove. Thomas watched every movement like a pup watching its first fire. When the food was ready, they ate in silence. The woman took only a few careful bites, but the boy devoured his bowl like he hadn't eaten in days. When the meal was done, Elias laid out the sleeping arrangements without ceremony. You take the bed, he told her. The boy gets my bedroll by the fire. I'll take the chair. You can't, she began. He raised a hand. No arguments. You need rest. He needs warmth. For a moment, something flickered in her gaze, maybe. Or pity. Elias wasn't sure which he hated more. She nodded once, then pulled the wool blanket tight around her shoulders. The boy curled up near the hearth. Elias leaned back in the chair, listening to the storm rip at the shutters. You've lost someone, the woman said softly across the dark. I can see it in your eyes. Elias stared at the fire. Most folks up here have. My husband, she said, voice steady. 7 winters passed. Silence stretched. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for words. Some winters, she added, never thaw until they must. Elias didn't reply. But somewhere deep in the ice around his heart, a hairline crack formed. Outside, the wind kept its long, hungry howl, but inside something shifted, just enough to keep the dark at bay. Dawn came gray and brittle. Elias woke to the smell of real coffee. Not the weak brew he'd been rationing for weeks, actual honest coffee. No Kose, he'd heard the boy call her that, moved slowly around his stove, favoring one ankle, but graceful as if she'd been born to a life of fire and smoke. I hope you don't mind, she said. Idle hands don't suit me. You should be resting. I've rested enough. Thomas was already awake, watching Elias from the floor, eyes curious. Why do you live alone, he asked, blunt as only a child can be. Thomas Nokose snapped. It's all right, Elias said, pouring coffee into a tin mug. He didn't answer right away. Just the way things turned out. Nokose's eyes flicked to the empty cradle in the corner, but she didn't ask. She didn't need to. Outside, the storm still roared. Inside, the fire burned steadily. The boy leaned closer to the flames, and Elias noticed something he hadn't let himself see in years, the sound of breathing in the cabin that wasn't just his own. For a man who'd lived too long in silence, it was almost deafening. Later that afternoon, the storm thickened again. Elias went outside to lash the shutters tighter. He caught movement through the swirling snow, something human crouched by the tree line. For a heartbeat, he thought it was a trick of wind and light. Then it was gone. His hand went to the rifle slung by the door. Inside, Nokose asked, "What is it?" Nothing. Elias lied. But something had stirred in the woods. As night fell, Nokose watched him from the bed. She spoke softly, like she wasn't sure if she was talking to him or the mountain itself. You brought us out of the storm. You didn't have to. Most men wouldn't. I ain't most men. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. No, you're not. Thomas stirred in his sleep, whispering something. Elias looked at the small body curled by the hearth, then at the woman's quiet strength, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost wandering through winter. The wind still howled, but it didn't sound so loud anymore. Elias lay in the chair, unable to sleep. Nokose's words replayed in his mind like a heartbeat in the dark. You're not just keeping us warm, mountain man. You're thawing something in yourself. He didn't know what scared him more, the storm outside, or the one beginning to stir inside his chest. The storm lasted another day and a half. Elias Redfern split wood in the lean-to with a quiet urgency breath fogging in the cold. The crack of his axe echoed across the ridge, bouncing off pines thick with snow. Every strike was sharper than it needed to be. Every log another distraction. Inside the cabin breathed differently now. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It had shape weight and warmth. Elias wasn't sure yet if that was a comfort or a warning. By the time he stepped back inside, his coat dusted white and hands stiff, Nokose had a pot of broth simmering, and the boy Tama was bent over a small pile of wood shavings, carving with one of Elias's old knives. Elias blinked. He hadn't said the boy could use it. But the blade moved carefully, sure. Not reckless. The kid had watched him and learned quickly. He's got good hands, Nokose said from the stove without turning. Steady. Intentional. Elias grunted, but it wasn't disagreement. He hung his coat by the door and poured himself a tin cup of coffee. The real stuff. He still hadn't asked how she found it in his stores, buried as it had been under 3 seasons' worth of dried meat and silence, but she had. Thank you, he said. It came out gruff, but it was the first time he'd said it to her. Nokose looked at him, measuring. I wasn't raised to sit around while men worked, she said. And I wasn't raised to wait for someone to save me either. But here we are. Tama looked up from his carving. Grandma's good with healing stuff, like plants, roots. She made Uncle Jed's hand better after he burned it on the forge. Elias nodded slowly. Do you know some medicine? Enough to not kill a man, she said. But I'd like to see what you keep. Elias hesitated. The shelf above the stove held the sum of what he knew. Willow bark dried spruce tips, bare fat, some powdered mold he'd scraped from a fallen elm and found useful for infection. His late wife Clara had taught him half of it, old tallow the rest. He stepped aside and let her look. Nokose's fingers moved with respect, not curiosity. You keep this place like you expect to survive, she said. I do. Then you're smarter than you look. He gave a soft, involuntary snort at that. First laugh in, he couldn't remember. She pulled down a small jar and sniffed. Fireweed root. Smart. Good for swelling. I figured that out the hard way, Elias muttered, rubbing the scar on his shoulder. The air in the cabin warmed as the fire cracked louder. The stew thickened. The storm thinned, and Tama's carving took the shape of a small, rough horse no bigger than a man's thumb. When Elias crouched beside the boy to look, Tama whispered, It's for you. 'Cause you saved us. Elias stared at it. A lump rose in his throat. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything at all. Just nodded once, slow and serious. The boy beamed. You're not just keeping us warm, mountain man, Nokose said from the table, eyes locked on Elias. You're thawing something in yourself. He looked away too quickly. They ate together that night. Elias didn't shrink his portion the way he usually did. Something about sharing made the food stretch further. Or maybe it just tasted better. When the meal was done, Nokose insisted on cleaning up. I still have legs even if one limps, she said, swatting Elias's hand away. Tama sat cross-legged by the fire again, holding the horse carving in his palm like it was sacred. His eyelids drooped heavily. Bedroll, Elias said gently. Go on now. The boy obeyed without protest. First time for that. Elias sat in his chair, the same chair he'd fallen asleep in 3 nights running now, and watched the flames dance. Nokose worked in silence, folding the rag, drying the tin bowls, resetting the room like she belonged in it. That unsettled him. The storm was breaking. Soon they'd be able to leave. She'd take the boy and go back to wherever she came from. "You never said where you were headed," he said finally. Nokose paused, dried her hands slowly. "We were bound for Missoula. My daughter had business there. We were supposed to meet her. But the road was treacherous, and the men we hired—" Her lips tightened. "They took our horses, left us for dead. They robbed you. They did worse. They took our names from their mouths. That's almost as bad." Elias understood that kind of erasure. People didn't say his name much anymore either. Only the trees and the wind bothered to remember. "Why were you going to Missoula?" he asked. "To keep a promise," she said simply. He didn't press. Later, Nokose sat near the hearth, stitching a tear in Tama's coat with hands steady and precise. Elias studied her from the chair. The way she moved, the quiet power in it. She wasn't just somebody's grandmother. She'd led men before. She'd survived storms without cabins and strangers. That much was clear. "Your boy Elias said he's sharp. He's my grandson. Still, he's more aware than most. He's had to be." Elias didn't ask what that meant. That night, after Tama fell asleep, Nokose spoke again. Her voice was softer now, like a memory sliding through a half-open door. "Your wife. The cradle. I saw it." Elias stiffened. "You don't have to speak her name," she said. "But you should someday." He said nothing. Couldn't. "The dead don't care if we remember them," she added. "But the living, especially the young, need to see we still carry something." Elias stood. He hung his coat on the peg without a word. The fire popped. "You think I'm dangerous?" he asked finally. "I think you're grieving." He turned his back to her, but not before she saw the pain crack his stoic face. The wind had died down by then. Only the faint whistle under the door remained. Nokose laid down again this time, with less hesitation. "You have kindness in you, Elias Redfern. Don't hide it so deep next time. We won't bite." He blew out the lantern. The cabin fell dark. But the kind of dark that didn't feel empty anymore. The next morning, the world outside had turned into a sheet of silver-white stillness. No wind. No clouds. Just the sharp blue of the post-storm winter sky. Elias stepped outside to check the woodpile. His boots crunched over fresh snow. And there, just at the edge of the tree line, were tracks. Not his, not the boy's, not Nokose's. Heavy. Humans. Boots. He crouched low, finger brushing the print. Fresh. Someone had been watching the cabin. Watching them. He stood up slowly, eyes sweeping the ridge. Inside, he heard Nokose asking Tama to stir the porridge. Nothing in her voice showed worry, but Elias's gut twisted. Someone had followed them. Or worse, they weren't lost at all. He brushed snow off his coat and stepped back inside, not yet ready to speak of what he'd seen. Not yet. The mountain had gone quiet, but something was moving beneath it. The sun was finally out, but the snow hadn't gone anywhere. It lay thick across the ridges, blanketing every pine, every hollow, every memory. The storm had passed, but Elias knew better than to trust clear skies in March. Up here, calm was just the mountain catching its breath. Inside the cabin, the air had settled into something quieter, gentler. Nokose was humming a low tune while grinding dried roots in a stone mortar, and Tama sat cross-legged on the floor, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth as he carved a piece of pine wood into shape. Elias watched the boy from the corner of his eye while sharpening his blade. Each stroke of the whetstone whispered into the stillness like the memory of rain. Tama looked up. "I think I got the legs right this time." Elias walked over, crouched beside him. The carving was still rough, but better than before. The boy had shaped a small horse, its head slightly off, but its form proud, upright. "Not bad," Elias said. "It's for you," Tama said. "So you remember. Remember what? That you saved us." Elias blinked, caught off guard. His fingers reached out, but he hesitated before taking it. The boy studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "A boy doesn't need a father. He needs a man who stays when it's easier to walk." The words hit deeper than the wind ever could. Elias looked up at Nokose, but she hadn't flinched. She just kept grinding like she'd heard nothing or everything. He took the carving, nodded once, and set it on the mantel beside the rifle. That night, Elias brought out his spare hide and began working on a pair of mitts for Tama. The boy had been helping chop kindling, stubbornly refusing to let his hands stay idle. Nokose sewed by the hearth, repairing a rip in Elias's coat with tight, even stitches. The kind of stitching you only saw from women who'd mended more than just clothes in their lifetime. "You got a trade?" Elias asked, keeping his tone casual. Nokose didn't look up. "I've done most things a woman can do without a man's permission. That covers healing and stitching too, and digging graves, and delivering babies, and scaring off debt collectors with a kitchen knife." Elias smirked. "I'll stay on your good side then. You're already on the boys. That's harder to earn." Elias looked over at Tama, who had fallen asleep, sitting upright against the firewood stack, a book open in his lap, one of the few left by Clara. "You teach him to read?" he asked. "I taught his mother. She taught him before she passed." A silence stretched between them, the kind that made you feel the years you'd been trying not to count. Elias leaned back, fingers brushing the wooden horse on the mantel. "You keep looking at that thing like it's got something to say," Nokose murmured. "Maybe it does. Maybe it's waiting for you to say something back." He didn't answer. Didn't have to. The next morning, he took Tama with him to check the traps. Nokose stayed behind, ankles still stiff from the cold, but she packed them a tin of smoked rabbit and flatbread. The trail was icy, but the sun was out. The mountain looked less like a graveyard and more like a cathedral. Tama didn't say much at first. He walked, close eyes scanning the trees. "You always live alone?" he finally asked. "For a while now. Don't you get scared of what ghosts or bears?" Elias shook his head. "Ghosts don't bother me. Bears only bite if you give them reason." Tama was quiet again. "Then my mama used to say people are like rabbits sometimes. How's that? They run in circles when they're scared. Makes them harder to catch." Elias chuckled. "She sounds like she was sharp." She was. But she got sick. Real fast. Elias said nothing. He knew better than to fill silence just because it hurt. They found 3 traps, one empty, one with a squirrel, one with a snowshoe, hair still warm. Tama flinched when Elias broke its neck. "That bother you?" Elias asked. "No, I didn't expect it to look at me." Elias nodded. "Ain't nothing easy about taking life, but it feeds us. And you say thank you." "That's all you can do," Tama whispered. "Thank you to the rabbit," almost inaudible. They headed back just as the wind picked up again. That night, Nokose roasted the hare with wild garlic from Elias's stores, and the three of them ate by firelight, sharing a silence that no longer felt awkward, just lived in. After supper, Elias took out his old Bible and offered it to Tama. "You read from it if you like. Not for prayers, just stories." The boy took it reverent and read aloud. About David and the bear, about courage, about facing giants. His voice was clear, strong, even when his hands trembled slightly from tiredness. Elias watched him, thinking of another boy who'd never had the chance to read anything. A daughter who never got to breathe past dawn. He walked outside into the night. The sky was full of stars, the kind that only appeared after violence had passed. And yet, he didn't feel alone anymore. The pines rustled, whispering in the wind. He turned when he heard footsteps of Nokose wrapped in his spare coat. "You're not a ghost," she said. "Feel like one sometimes." "Then why do you still cook, still carve wood, still fix fences?" Elias didn't answer. She stepped closer. "You keep things going, Elias. That's what the living do." He looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred, still working. "You believe in second chances?" he asked. "I believe in stubborn ones, and you're one of them." He smiled faintly. "Tama told me I was his home. He's not wrong." They stood there for a moment side by side, not touching, not needing to. When they stepped back inside, Elias saw something on the table that hadn't been there before: a folded cloth. Inside it, the wooden horse Tama carved, but now it had reins made from twine. Details added by Nokose's hand. A collaboration. A family's first unspoken agreement. Later that night, as Elias checked the bolts on the door, he noticed something at the threshold, just the faintest smudge in the snow. A heel. A boot. It hadn't snowed since morning. Someone had been close, watching. He shut the door softly. Didn't wake Nokose. Didn't say a word. But he didn't sleep either. The fire burned low. The wind whispered again. Tomorrow he'd ride down the ridge and make a supply run. He'd have questions for Mavis Quinn. And he had a feeling she had some for him too. The next morning the sky hung heavy with mist, clinging to the treetops like old grief. Elias stood outside, jaw tight, staring at the snow-smeared print by the cabin door. It hadn't been made by his boots, or Nokose's, or Tama's. Whoever left it had come close. Close enough to hear them talk. Close enough to watch them eat. Close enough to know what they were to each other now. He stepped inside and laced up his riding gear without a word. Nokose glanced up from slicing dried meat and raised an eyebrow. "Are you riding out trading post?" he said. "Running low on coffee. Salt too." She didn't press, but her eyes followed him like she knew he wasn't just going for supplies. Tama appeared at the door, boots half-tied. "Can I come?" "Not this time," Elias said. "You help your grandma." The boy's face fell, but he nodded. Outside, the mare snorted in the cold, eager to move. Elias mounted and rode downhill the path, winding through frosted spruce and cedar snow, melting in narrow streaks as spring fought its way back. The air was too still. By the time he reached the small outpost nestled between two ridges, the wind had picked up. Smoke curled from the chimney of the general store, and the wooden porch creaked under his boots as he stepped up. Mavis Quinn looked up from behind the counter, her sleeves rolled, hands covered in flour. "Well, well, the mountain sends down its ghost." Elias pulled off his gloves. "I need salt. Coffee. Some canvas if you got it." She motioned toward the shelves without looking at him. "Help yourself. You're lucky you missed the caravan." loud bunch. Flatlanders with shiny boots and questions they thought they could answer with a coin. Elias still. What kind of questions? Mavis finally looked at him, eyes narrowing. About missing family, a woman and a child. Wagon gone over near Copper Creek Trail. Word is they're from money. Big money. The kind that brings bounty hunters out of hibernation. Elias said nothing, but Mavis saw something in his face cracking just a little. I knew you'd come down today, she added. The wind told me. He gave her a sharp look. I ain't saying I got sight, she said, shrugging. But I know a man who's carrying weight that doesn't belong to him alone. He gathered the items, stacked them in a burlap sack. Did they say what family creek? She said. Jebediah Creek's people. Out of Carson Gulch. Elias exhaled slow. He knew that name. Everyone on this side of the mountain did. They owned a stretch of land so wide you could lose a year riding across it. Men like that didn't let go of anything they considered theirs. Anything else? He asked. Mavis's voice dropped. Yeah. Word is they're paying for silence, too. A man who helped them vanish. He ain't safe, especially if they think he knows things he shouldn't. Elias met her eyes. They were dying in the snow, he said flatly. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't care. Maybe you should start, she said. He left without another word. By the time he reached home, dusk had started curling around the ridgelines. The light turned gold, then blue, then gone. As he dismounted, Tama ran out to greet him, bareheaded, wild-eyed, with something that looked close to joy. Old Tallow came, the boy said. He's inside, Elsa, frozen. He hadn't seen the old man in almost a year. Inside the cabin smelled of spruce and sage. Old Tallow sat by the fire like he'd never left, wrapped in layers of deerskin, his eyes sharp behind a curtain of gray hair. You always show up right before something breaks, Elias said, setting down the sack. Then maybe stop breaking so much, the elder replied. Tama laughed quietly. Nokose poured a cup of tea and handed it to the old man without ceremony. They knew each other. That much was clear. Old Tallow sipped, then set the tin down. You've taken them in, he said, looking at Elias. They needed help. They still do, but so do you. Elias didn't reply. Tallow leaned forward. His voice dropped soft but stern. You carry your dead like stones in your boots. That's why you never move too far. Elias's jaw clenched. I buried them. That was the end. No. That was the beginning. The fire popped. You live like the mountain owes you something, Tallow said. But the mountain doesn't mourn, boy. It remembers and it waits. Tama sat quiet, eyes wide. What's it waiting for? He whispered. Tallow looked at him. For you. For him. For spring. For the courage to speak what's never been said. Nokose's eyes met Elias's, then unflinching. He's not wrong. Later after supper, Tallow told stories, old ones, about rivers that changed course and warriors who learned to hunt by walking backward, about ghosts who only visited the living when the living were ready to listen. Tama sat rapt. Elias sat still. And Nokose. She just listened, her hands folded in her lap, like she'd already heard the stories before, but needed to hear them again. When the fire died down, Tallow stood. I won't stay, he said. The snow's not done talking yet. But listen close, Elias Redfern. Winter hides things, but spring reveals them. He touched Tama's head gently, nodded once to Nokose, then stepped out into the night. Elias didn't follow. But he did sit by the fire long after the others had gone to bed. He stared into the coals until they stopped glowing, the old man's words echoing in his skull. The mountain remembers. The mountain waits. He didn't sleep. The next morning, while Nokose baked flatbread and Tama refilled the water barrel, Elias took the mare out and rode a slow loop around the cabin. He found them near the creek bed. Footprints. Again. He followed them for a quarter-mile, crouched low, rifle ready, but they vanished in the brush like breathing into the wind. Someone had been watching again. Closer now. When he returned, Nokose was waiting on the porch, arms crossed. "You saw them too," she said. Elias nodded. "Then we need to be ready." He looked past her at the cabin, at the boy inside. "Yeah," he said, "we do." And in the back of his mind, Mavis's words stirred again. "They're paying for silence too. Tomorrow he'll ride back to the post." But not alone. Because secrets didn't just walk up the mountain. They hunted. The wind was blowing hard down the pass, the kind of wind that cut across the skin like it knew where the old wounds lived. Elias tightened the cinch on his mare and scanned the trail behind him one last time. No footprints today. No fresh ones, at least. Still, his gut was tight. The kind of tightness that told him something was coming. Nokose had offered to ride with him. He told her no. "I don't need you risking your neck for beans and bullets," he said. She just stared at him long and steady. "You're not the only one who knows how to read danger, Redfern." "Maybe not. But I'm the only one who's been shot for someone else's." She didn't argue after that. Just handed him a pouch of dried venison and a strip of birch bark tied with a leather cord. "For luck," she said. Tama gave him the wooden horse again, this time tied to a loop of twine like a talisman. "Hang it on your saddle. If it falls off, you're going the wrong way." Elias nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He rode out before sunrise. By mid-morning, he could see the faint line of smoke from Mavis Quinn's trading post curling against the bright blue sky. No clouds, no storm, no mercy. He rode up, slow eyes alert. 3 new horses were hitched out front. All were better bred than anything that should have been out this far unless someone had coin to burn or enemies to chase. He tied his mare off to the side and stepped up on the porch. The door creaked open before he touched it. Mavis stood there, a rifle slung casually across her chest, flower on her apron, and a look in her eyes like she'd already guessed what he'd come for. "You're late," she said. "Are you expecting me? I expect most men to come back when something's chewing at their heels." He stepped inside. The warmth smelled like yeast and wood smoke. She shut the door behind him and gestured toward the back. "They're gone now, headed west. But they'll be back." Elias followed her past the front shelves into the kitchen. A pot bubbled on the stove, and next to it a tin plate with biscuits still steaming. "Do they say anything new?" he asked. Mavis poured 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. "Just more of the same. Woman and boy. High reward. Missing presumed dead. Or hiding." Elias took a sip. "Let the burn settle in." "Jebediah Creek sent them," she added. "He's not the kind of man who leaves loose threads." "I figured," Elias said. Mavis studied him. "You look different, Redfern, like a man who's got something to lose again." Elias didn't answer. "I didn't need to." It was all over his face. "Are they sniffing too close?" she asked. He nodded. "Footprints by the cabin. Twice now." Mavis shook her head. "They won't come quiet and they won't come fair. But they'll come." Elias leaned against the counter. His eyes were far away. "They think they're hunting animals. What they don't know is that the mountain hunts back. Mavis cracked a dry smile. That it does. She went to a drawer, pulled out a leather pouch, and handed it to him. Ammo. Clean. Yours. I'll pay. You already are. There was a pause heavy between them. Then she said, You still got that old repeater needs cleaning. Then clean it. And keep the boy close. Elias turned to leave, but Mavis stopped him at the door. Are you planning to run? She asked. No. Good. 'Cause if you were, I'd slap you myself. Some things ain't meant to be left behind. He nodded once. Thanks, Mavis. She watched him go, her eyes never leaving his back. Elias rode fast on the way home. The kind of fast that says you're hoping not to be followed but ready if you are. He made it back by dusk. Snow had started to melt in patches along the ridgeline. The river below the cabin was starting to hum again, a warning and a promise. Nokose was waiting on the porch, arms folded as if she'd been standing there all day. Trouble, she asked. Not yet, Elias said. But it's coming. Thomas stood in the doorway, looking small and too quiet. Elias ruffled his hair as he passed. Are we ready? Nokose asked. As we'll ever be. That night, Elias cleaned the repeater by lamplight. Tama watched him wide-eyed. You gonna shoot someone? He asked. Hope not. Do you know how I do? Tama was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't want you to die. Elias stopped cleaning. I looked at the boy. I don't plan on it. Later, after everyone else had gone to sleep, Elias sat by the fire alone. The wooden horse rested beside him on the mantel, the same one Tama had carved, now smoothed from being handled so much. He stared into the flames, remembering Mavis's voice. Some things ain't meant to be left behind. The next morning, the birds were louder. The snow was softer, and the ridge carried an edge like the breath before a shout. He saddled his mare again and checked the traps, this time with Tama beside him. The boy asked fewer questions now. He moved quieter. He was learning. Near the end of their loop, they came across something unusual. A set of tracks that didn't belong, too clean, too purposeful, leading off toward the northern bend. Elias crouched low, finger pressed to one of the prints. Heavy, he muttered. Too heavy for just a rider. What is it? Tama whispered. Elias stood slowly, eyes narrowing at the tree line. It's someone who doesn't want to be found, but doesn't care if we know they're close. As they headed back, Elias's hand hovered near the rifle strapped to his back. Not paranoid, just prepared. That night, Nokose spoke softly after dinner, her eyes locked on Elias's. They're circling closer. I know. We'll have to decide soon. He nodded. Next time they come sniffing, they won't find us cold. She stood across the room and placed her hand on his shoulder. You're not alone anymore, Elias. He looked at her and for the first time didn't flinch. I know, he said. The fire burned low again, but this time he didn't stay up watching it die. He slept. Not deep, not long, but enough. Because tomorrow they'd ride. And this time he wouldn't come back empty-handed. The moon was high, pale, and watchful above the ridge. A bitter wind scraped through the trees like it had bones to pick, and inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to a quiet glow. Elias had just settled into the chair with his rifle beside him when he heard it. Not the wind, not an animal. A footstep. Soft, but wrong. Not a deer. Not a coyote. Human. He was on his feet before the second sound came. He didn't call out. There was no one out there to answer him in good faith. He moved to the window, kept low, peeled back the corner of the curtain, just enough to see. There. A figure crouched by the barn, watching. Elias slipped the rifle into his hands like it belonged there and stepped toward the door. Before he opened it, he turned to Nokose, who was already awake, eyes sharp. "Keep Tama inside," he whispered. She nodded. "How many? Just one?" "So far." He stepped outside. Cold hit him like a slap. The snow was crusted over from the melt freeze of the past few days, and his boots barely sank. He moved slow, quiet. The figure didn't flinch, didn't run. Just stood slowly as Elias approached, hands out and empty. It was a man. Rough beard, thick coat, leather gloves that looked too new for someone local. "You Redfern?" the man asked, voice low and ragged. "Depends. I have no quarrel with you. I'm just here to collect what's mine." Elias raised the rifle a little. "You leave something out here in the snow." The man smirked. "I left 2 people for dead. But it turns out they're breathing again." "That's a problem." Elias didn't blink. "They're not yours to take." The man's face twisted. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think they're gonna stay with you once they know who's looking?" "I don't care who's looking." "You should." Jebediah Creek doesn't like it when his property wanders off. Elias's finger slid closer to the trigger. "They ain't property." The man took a step forward. "You gonna shoot me, mountain man? That's it, no," Elias said. Then he moved. Fast. Shoulder down, he slammed into the man's chest and drove him into the snow. The rifle clattered aside. The man was strong, but Elias had fought harder men with less to lose. Fists slammed into ribs. Elbows scraped across jaws. The man pulled a blade, slashed at Elias's side, but not deep. Elias wrestled it free, tossed it, then landed a hard punch to the temple that stilled the stranger's limbs. He stood panting. Snow and blood and steam rising off him like a storm breaking open. The man groaned. Elias knelt, grabbed him by the collar. "You alone." The man spit, blood sneered. "Today." Elias dragged him into the barn and tied him tight with mule rope wrists and ankles. He wasn't going anywhere. By the time he stepped back into the cabin, blood trailing at his hip, Nokose was already boiling water. Tama stood frozen near the hearth, eyes wide. "Are you okay?" the boy whispered. Elias nodded, sat down heavily. "Scratch. Nothing more." Nokose worked in silence, cleaning the wound with boiled cloth. Her hands were firm but gentle. Tama hadn't moved. Elias looked at him. "It's over, son." The boy's voice cracked. "He was here for us, wasn't he? Yeah." "Will more come?" Elias didn't lie. "Probably." Tama's lip trembled. "I'm scared." "So am I," Elias said quietly. "But being scared doesn't mean running. Scared just means you're paying attention." The boy nodded slowly. Then without warning, he crossed the room and wrapped his arms tight around Elias's waist. "I don't want to leave," he said. "Ever." Elias rested his hand on the boy's back. "You won't." Nokose watched them, something in her expression softening and hardening all at once. "He's my friend," Tama said fiercely. "You're not broken. You're the best man I know." Elias closed his eyes for a moment, his throat too tight to speak. Outside, the wind shifted. By dawn, the man in the barn was awake, cursing, spitting, and threatening. Elias didn't argue. He didn't rise to it. He just stood in the doorway and said, "You'll walk back to whoever sent you. Tell them the mountain's not empty. And I won't forget." The man laughed. "You think they'll listen to me? No. But they'll see what's missing from your hand." Elias held up the knife he'd taken from him the night before. "Tell them next time they'll leave more than that behind." Later, he set the man's horse loose in the opposite direction. Left the man with a water skin and a limp. That was enough mercy. Inside, Nokose was waiting. Tama sat at the table, his face drawn but determined. "You did right," Nokose said. "I didn't kill him. That's not always what right means." Elias poured himself coffee with a shaking hand. Tama reached out and steadied it with his small fingers. That afternoon, the boy didn't ask to go outside. He stayed close to Elias, helping sharpen tools, grind grain sort supplies. He didn't ask to play. He worked. At one point, he looked up and said, "Are we a family now?" Elias didn't answer right away, but he smiled. And that was enough. That night, Nokose sat across from him, sewing silently. "You think they'll stop coming?" she asked. "No." "Then what do? We get ready." She nodded. "He's not afraid anymore." "Good," Elias said. "Because we're going to need his courage." Tama fell asleep, curled by the fire again, the wooden horse clutched in his hand like a weapon or a prayer. Elias stood over him, watching the slow rise and fall of the boy's breath. "You saved him once," Nokose said behind him, "but now he's saving you." Elias turned to her. "You believe that I do." And for once he did too. Later in the dark, the wind rose again. But the mountain didn't feel as cold. It felt awake, alive. Tomorrow he will ride, not just to scout, but to decide, to choose. Because now it wasn't just about survival. It was about belonging. The thaw came slow, like a wounded animal dragging itself back to life. Snow still clung to the shaded parts of the ridge, but patches of brown earth had started breaking through. Water dripped steadily from the eaves of the cabin, tapping a rhythm that felt almost hopeful. Almost. Elias stood on the porch, sharpening his hatchet, watching the tree line for movement. The man he let walk had vanished into the southern ravine 3 days back, limping and cursing, but Elias knew it wasn't over. That kind of trouble didn't limp away for good. Inside, Nokose was organizing what remained of their winter stores, and Tama sat near the hearth, trying to repair the handle of a wooden bucket, with more patience than skill. The rhythm of life had returned, but not the rhythm of peace. Elias stepped inside, hung his hat on the peg, and stretched the tension from his shoulders. "We need more hands," Nokose said without looking up. "We need more food first," Elias answered. She turned, brushing flour from her skirt. "Food we can make, but those hands are harder to come by." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering to hire help?" "I'm saying if we're staying, we'd best start acting like we belong here." He looked around the cabin, the patched roof, the stacked firewood, the drying herbs she'd organized with surgeon precision. He didn't remember when this place had started to feel like more than a shelter, but it had. "You're thinking long-term," he said. "I'm thinking of survival. And survival doesn't mean hiding. It means planting something that can outlive the winter." Tama looked up. "Like roots." "Exactly like roots," she said. Elias leaned against the table, arms crossed. "So what's the plan, Nokose?" She met his gaze without blinking. "We stop waiting for them to come to us. You want to go to them, I want to stop running." Elias stared at the floor for a long moment, then nodded. All right. That night they sat around the table longer than usual. The fire burned low, the stew simmered slow, and the quiet was thick but not heavy. Tama broke it. Are we ever going back? He asked, voice small. Where Elias asked. To where we came from. To the other house, the one with the big windows. Nokose took a deep breath. Do you want to? Tama looked between them, brow furrowed. I don't know. It was big, but it was cold. Not like here. Elias said nothing, just listened. Do you miss it? Nokose asked gently. The boy shook his head. I miss Mama, but not the house. Nokose reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Later, when Tama had gone to sleep, Elias sat by the fire, tossing a piece of bark into the flames. He deserves better than this, he said. This is better than most children get. He needs more. He needs you, Nokose said softly. You've been surviving so long, Elias, you forgot how to live. He looked at her sharply, but she wasn't challenging him. She was seeing him. I gave him a warm fire and some traps, Elias said. You gave him safety. You gave him space to breathe. And when Jebediah comes for him, what then? Then we stand. The words hung between them. You really believe we can win? Elias asked. She smiled, faint and firm. I believe in making them fight harder than they thought they'd have to. He let out a breath, slow and shaky. You're not afraid. I'm always afraid, she said. But fear doesn't run this place. Not anymore. Elias reached for the carved wooden horse still perched on the mantel. He turned it in his hand, felt its small weight. I'm not the man I used to be. No, Nokose said. You're better. The next morning, the world outside had softened. The creek ran faster. Birds called from the bare trees. Spring was crawling up the mountain in muddy boots. Elias took Tama out with him to repair the fencing around the north line. The boy carried wire cutters, walked steadily despite the slush. His coat hung heavy on him, but he didn't complain. You think they're coming? Tama asked, watching Elias hammer a post into the thawing earth. Probably. Will we run? No. Tama nodded. Good. I'm tired of running. Elias stopped, looked down at him. You're not scared anymore. I am, the boy admitted. But I feel strong when I'm with you. Elias's throat tightened. He bent down and adjusted the boy's gloves. That's not nothing, son. They walked the line, patching what they could. Tracks of deer and rabbits crossed the mud. A hawk circled high above the ridge. Back at the cabin, Nokose had begun cleaning out the storeroom. She moved like someone preparing to stay. That afternoon, while Elias sawed planks for a new bench, Nokose stepped outside, wiping her hands on a cloth. I want to show you something, she said. He followed her to the overlook, just west of the cabin, a small rise where the trees opened into a view of the valley. She pointed to a stretch of land down below. This soil's rich. There's water from the spring. If we planted corn potatoes, squash it'd take. Elias scanned the slope, imagining it in bloom. Rows, order, life. You've thought this through. I've been thinking for a long time. He looked at her. And what about when they come for you, for him? We won't be hard to find, she said, but we won't be easy to take. She turned to face him fully. I don't want to hide Elias. Not anymore. I want to plant roots, not live on the run. This land, it's hard, but it's honest. And I think... She paused, searching his face. I think you're tired of hiding too. Elias didn't speak for a while. Then he nodded, slow and solid. All right, he said. We stay. She smiled, not wide, but real. And in that smile, something inside him settled. That night, they drew up plans by lantern light about what to build, where to dig, how to reinforce the barn. Elias sketched fences on the back of an old ledger page. Nokose made lists. Tama fell asleep in a pile of flour sacks. They were planning for something more than survival. They were planning for a future. And while they worked, the wind shifted again, not sharp, not cold, but carrying something else. A warning. Because the thaw meant movement, and movement meant eyes on the ridge, feet on the trail. They were coming. But this time they wouldn't find a man and a boy and a woman cowering in a cabin. They'd find something stronger. They'd find a family willing to fight. They came at first light, just as the valley was breaking open into spring. Elias was already outside splitting wood when the sound of hooves drifted in from the east. Not one horse, not two. A group, fast, coordinated. He stopped mid-swing. Nokose stepped out onto the porch behind him, her hair tied back, apron dusted in flour. Her eyes narrowed as she listened. How many, she asked. 6, Elias said. Maybe more. He leaned the axe against the post, wiped his hands on his coat, and walked to the barn. From inside, he pulled out the Winchester he'd cleaned 3 times since the last visit. Inside the cabin, Tama peeked through the window, the wooden horse gripped tight in his fist. Nokose closed the shutters. Stay by the stove, child, and don't open that door unless it's me or Elias. The rumble grew louder. Soon the riders crested the ridge, sharp silhouettes against the pale sky. Clean coats, polished saddles, rifles at their sides. These weren't wanderers or trappers. These were professionals. And leading them was a man who looked like a courtroom turned to flesh. Jebediah Creek, mid-40s, square-jawed, neatly trimmed beard, and eyes like winter had taken up residence behind them. He pulled his horse to a halt in front of Elias, not even pretending to offer a greeting. You, Elias Redfern, he asked. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Jebediah's gaze swept the cabin, the field, the fixed fencing. This is your place, it is. How convenient. Elias's voice came low and firm. State your business. Jebediah dismounted in one fluid motion. His boots crunched the gravel like they had a purpose all their own. I'm here for my son, he said. Behind Elias, the cabin door opened. Tama stood there, 1 foot on the porch, trembling but defiant. I'm not your son, he said. The words cut through the morning like a shot. Jebediah's jaw clenched. You'll come down from there. Tama didn't move. No. Elias took a step forward, positioning himself between them. You've made a long ride, Mr. Creek. Best you turn back now. Jebediah smiled, thin and cold. You think this is a negotiation? That child has a name and a family. And that woman inside is my late wife's mother. They belong to me. You mistake blood for ownership, Elias said. Jebediah gestured, and one of his men stepped forward with a folded document. He tossed it at Elias's feet. Legal guardianship, signed and notarized. No matter what lies she's told you, Nokose Thornton is not his mother. She has no claim. Elias didn't bend to pick it up. What did you offer the judge? Elias asked. Land livestock. Jebediah's eyes didn't flinch. Protection, stability, legacy. You left them to die in a snowstorm. The other man, still holding the reins of his horse, shifted, slightly uncomfortable. Elias caught it. They told me the truth, he continued. Robbed, abandoned. And now you come crawling back with paperwork and threats. I come with rights, Jebediah snapped. And I come with reason, Nkosi said, stepping out beside Tama, a shotgun cradled in her arms. Jebediah turned to her. Mother Thornton, I stopped being your mother the day you called Thomas a burden. The name hung in the air. Thomas. Not the boy. Not the child. His name. You're angry, Jebediah said smoothly. But emotions fade. This land, this man, he can't give you a future. He already has, Nkosi said. Jebediah took a step toward Tama. You come now, or I'll take you by force. Tama shrank back. Elias raised his rifle a hair. You'll leave with your pride, or you'll leave with broken teeth. But you will leave. Tension snapped tight like wire pulled to breaking. Then Nkosi spoke again, voice low but clear. If you let them take him, Elias, you're not just losing a boy, you're surrendering your soul. Jebediah's eyes narrowed. You threatening me, Redfern? No, Elias said. I'm warning you. You don't belong here. Not anymore. Jebediah's lip curled. He turned to his men. Mount up. As they turned to leave, Tama whispered, I'm scared. Elias crouched beside him. So am I. But you're brave. Tama looked him in the eyes. Promise you won't let them take me. Elias rested a hand on his shoulder. I promise. As Jebediah swung into his saddle, he called back. You've made a mistake, Mountain Man. I'll be back with more than words. Elias didn't respond. He watched them vanish into the trees. Then he stood, turned, and walked back inside. Nkosi followed him, closing the door behind her. Her hands trembled only slightly. I should have told you everything, she said. From the beginning. You told me enough. I was afraid. So was I. She sat at the table, rested her hands on the wood, like it could steady her. We don't run, she said. No, Elias said. We prepare. That night, the cabin was quiet. No one spoke much over dinner. Tama clung to the wooden horse, rubbing the twine smooth with his thumb. Elias cleaned the rifles again, tightened the hinges, checked the barn locks. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, they stood together. Not just three people waiting. A family refusing to be broken. The next morning, Elias went down to the river and filled 3 buckets. He looked at the trees, the ridge, the sky. Then he whispered to the wind. You want to fight, Jebediah? You'll get one. Because next time they wouldn't just defend what they had. They'd defend what they'd become. Snowmelt ran in thick rivulets through the valley, carving veins in the land that hadn't seen open earth in months. Birds were louder now. The scent of pine and damp moss clung to everything. But Elias couldn't enjoy any of it. The wind carried more than the changing season. It carried footsteps. Jebediah Creek wasn't a man to bluff. When he said he'd be back, Elias knew he meant it. He just didn't expect it this soon. It was Nkosi who saw the first 3 riders on the northern ridge watching from the shadow of a burnt-out pine. They didn't come closer, didn't call out. They just sat there, like wolves. Elias stood on the porch, rifle slung across his back, eyes locked on the silhouettes. They're chasing us, Nkosi said. They're measuring the land, Elias replied, looking for soft spots. Let them. He turned to her. Why? She met his eyes, fierce and calm. Because the mountain doesn't shout. It waits, and then it buries. Inside the cabin, Tama helped gather supplies. He moved quieter now, more aware. Less like a child, more like someone who'd seen the fire, and knew it could burn. Elias caught him staring at the rifle leaned by the hearth. "You're not ready for that," Elias said gently. Tama didn't look away. "I want to be. You'll have to be. But not yet." They fortified everything over the next 2 days, double-braced the doors, laid traps through the lower trail, and camouflaged the footpath down to the creek. Elias rode down to Mavis Quinn's outpost and came back with powder-more rounds and a wrapped package she handed him without a word. "You'll need it," she said. "And Elias, when it happens, make it clean." He unwrapped it by firelight that night. A short-barrel Henry rifle lighter than his repeater faster. Greased, maintained, deadly. Nokose glanced at it and nodded approval. "You think she knows?" Elias asked. "She's lived here longer than both of us." "She knows." That night, Nokose sat cross-legged near the fire, drawing something into the dirt with the burnt end of a stick, an outline of the land around the cabin. "3 entry points," she murmured. "East, west, and creekside." "We trap the east," Elias said. "Force them to come from the front." "I'll take the west," she said. "I'll hold the front." She drew 3 X's, 1 for each of them. Tama came and stood behind them, watching. "You have a place for me," Elias turned. "With us." The boy frowned. "But I don't want to just hide." "You'll do more than hide," Nokose said. "You'll survive." The next morning came with heavy fog, the kind that made trees into ghosts and sound into echoes. Elias sat on the porch sharpening a knife when he heard it. A whistle. Not a bird. Not wind. A man's whistle. Then a voice calm and easy drifting from the trees. "Redfern, you out here playing house with what's mine?" Elias stood slowly, jaw tight. "I told you not to come back," he said loud enough to carry. Another voice answered. "This one is sharper, younger, and we told you we don't leave things unfinished." From the trees, they emerged 5 men in staggered formation. Jebediah at the center, reins in one hand, rifle across his saddle. 2 of them carried long-range rifles. One had a shotgun slung loose. They didn't look like they were here to talk. Elias stepped forward. "You crossed a line when you left them to die," he said. Jebediah shrugged. "I didn't leave them. I let nature decide. Same thing that'll happen to you." Elias gritted his teeth. "Then nature's about to change its mind." Nokose appeared at the corner of the house, rifle raised, calm as morning frost. 5 rifles, she said flatly. "Not enough." Jebediah chuckled. "Funny thing about fighting for people, once bullets fly, they start to wonder if it's worth it." "You think they're afraid," Elias said. "They're not. You are." Jebediah's smile broke. "You've made this harder than it had to be." "Good," Elias said, "because the easy way would have dishonored them." Behind him, Tama appeared with a sling strapped across his chest, peeking from behind the doorframe. Jebediah pointed. "Are you letting the boy see this?" "He needs to." Jebediah dismounted slowly, casually. The other men stayed on horseback, forming a half-circle. "I'm not leaving without them," he said. "That's your final warning." Elias took a breath, then said the words that split the morning open. "You may own the land, Jebediah, but out here, the land don't care who you are." A gunshot cracked. One of the riders jolted his shoulder, exploding red. He dropped from his saddle with a scream. Mavis Quinn stepped out from the tree line behind them, lever action smoking. "You sons of whores forgot to check your 6, she called. Chaos broke. Shots flew. Nokose fired from the corner, taking one man off his horse. Elias dropped low and rolled behind the water trough, firing 3 rounds that scattered the others. Tama ducked behind the door, heart racing, clutching the sling. Jebediah dove for cover behind a stump, returning fire wildly. Elias moved like he was born in gunsmoke, steady, ruthless, quiet between shots. One of the riders tried to flank left and caught Nokose's second bullet in the gut. Mavis reloaded behind a fallen log, laughing like she hadn't laughed in years. "Didn't think I'd miss the fun, did you?" she yelled. Jebediah, bleeding from a graze to his arm, screamed at the last man to retreat. They turned tail, dragging their wounded, firing blindly as they fled into the trees. The whole thing lasted less than 3 minutes. Then silence. Birdsong. Wind. The world is trying to pretend nothing had happened. Elias stood breathing hard, blood on his sleeve, smoke in his nose. Tama ran out and hugged him tight. "You didn't let them take me." Elias held him. "I never would." Nokose limped toward them, dragging a broken rifle barrel. Mavis stepped up, grinning through her gray curls. "Next time, maybe you send a letter before all the drama." Elias looked around at the bodies, the blood, the broken ground. "They'll be back," Nokose said. "Let them," Elias replied, "because this time they'd seen what happened when you tried to take from people who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect." The bodies were buried by midday. No words were said over them, just dirt, stone, and silence. The land didn't ask for explanations. It simply took what was broken and gave back something quiet in return. Elias stood over the last grave, wiping the back of his neck with a blood-stained cloth. The wind was still, as if even nature knew this was a moment to listen, not speak. Behind him, Nokose crouched over her rifle, inspecting the damage. The stock had cracked from recoil. Her lip was split, but she hadn't flinched once. Mavis poured water into a tin basin, her hands red and raw from helping drag bodies. "I never liked that one," she muttered, glancing toward the last shallow grave. "He used to steal tobacco off my porch back in '84. Elias smirked, just barely. Tama sat on the porch steps, silent, his small hands stained with ash from helping burn the torn coats of the men who'd attacked them. He didn't speak much, but he didn't cry either. He just watched like someone twice his age. Elias walked over and sat beside him. "You did good," he said. "I didn't do anything. You stayed still. You stayed sharp. That's something." Tama looked up. "Will they come again?" Elias nodded. "Yes." Tama thought for a moment. "Will we have to kill again?" Elias didn't answer at first. Then he said, "We'll protect each other, however we have to." The boy nodded slowly, then leaned his head against Elias's side. "No more questions. Just trust." That night, Mavis stayed for stew and whiskey. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the log walls. They ate in silence at first. Then Nokose cleared her throat and said, "They'll regroup. He'll send more." "He'll send worse," Mavis added. "Men who don't bother with legal talk and names." "We'll be ready," Elias said. "Are you sure about that?" "I wasn't before," he admitted. "I am now." Mavis leaned back, eyeing him with something between pride and skepticism. "You know what happens next, don't you? Yeah. A man's got to decide if he's building a home or guarding a tomb." That line dropped like a stone in a well. Nobody spoke after it. Not for a long time. The next morning, Elias woke before dawn and walked out to the northern field. Fog clung to the ground, curling between the stumps and new fence posts like smoke from a long burning fire. He crouched down and dragged a finger through the dirt. still rich, still willing. He stood and walked back to the cabin. Mavis was already saddling her mule. "Are you sure you want to go?" he asked. "I came to help win a fight. I didn't sign up to raise squash and chop firewood." He chuckled. "Have you ever thought about staying?" "Every damn time I leave," she said with a grin. "But no, I got people down south who depend on me. They'll be needing this news before someone else sends it uglier." She looked back at the cabin. "At least now I know there's a place up here where people stand for each other. That's rare. Hold on to it." "I intend to." Mavis paused. "You should go see the woman in Bridger's Hollow. My name's Arla. She's a mediator respected by folks on both sides of the aisle. If Jebediah wants to keep throwing men at your doorstep, she might help slow his hand." Elias raised a brow. "You think he listens to anyone?" "I think he listens to people who threaten his reputation." He nodded. "I'll find her." They clasped forearms before she mounted up and trotted off, her silhouette fading into the trees like smoke from a chimney. Back inside, Nokose was repairing the pantry shelf, her sleeves rolled, her eyes focused. Elias leaned in the doorway. "She's right," he said. Nokose didn't look up. "About what? If we want a future, we can't just hole up and wait." She paused. "Then let's make one." Tama poked his head around the corner. "Can I plant the beans today?" Elias smiled. "Yeah, partner. Let's do that." By mid-morning, the three of them were in the back plot, digging rows into the softened soil. It was slow work, but honest. The kind of work that made your back ache and your soul settle. As Elias worked the earth, he kept glancing toward the tree line. Not out of fear, out of readiness. Around noon, a rider appeared in the distance, not fast, not sneaky. Just a lone figure coming up the ridge trail, hand raised in peace. Nokose was the first to spot him. "Friend or curiosity," she muttered. They let the man approach. He was barely 30. Dusty coat, eyes sharp but not cruel. He stopped 10 paces from the cabin. "Name's Harlan Bishop," he said. "I ain't here to start nothing." Elias eyed him. "Then why are you here?" Harlan cleared his throat. "I work for Creek. Or used to. I saw what he did. How he twisted things. I left. And I heard about what happened here. That you stood him down. That you bled for a kid that wasn't yours by blood." Elias didn't respond. Harlan shifted. "I ain't proud of who I rode with. But I know how they think. I know how they come back. And I want to help stop them." Silence. Then Nokose stepped forward. "Why? Because I'm tired of following bad men. And I think you folks might be the kind that remember what right feels like." Elias nodded once. "We'll hear what you know." They sat him by the fire that night, fed him stew, and let him talk. He told them about Creek's money, the bounty circles, and the plans for the valley. "He's coming back," Harlan said. "But he won't make the same mistake. Next time he'll bring men who don't care if it's a family or a fort. They'll burn it down." Elias's jaw tightened. "Then we don't wait for next time." They looked at each other, the firelight casting the shape of resolve on every face. "We built this place like it's gonna last," Nokose said. "Because it has to," Elias added. And so while the moon climbed higher outside and the shadows grew long, they planned. Not for another fight, but for something bigger, something lasting. Because the war wasn't just over a boy. It was over who gets to belong. And they'd decided this mountain belonged to those who bled for it. The snow never came back. Spring rolled over the mountain with muddy boots and a growl in its belly. The fields soaked up the thaw, the streams ran clear, and buds started blooming on the dogwood trees like little white flags waving in defiance. It was the kind of season that reminded men the world kept moving no matter how many bullets were fired or bones buried. Elias was up before the sun, sharpening a spade and drinking coffee so black it bit back. The boy was still sleeping, curled like a pup under the quilt. Nokose had already gone down to the field to check the new rows, and Harlan, now a quiet shadow that rarely left, was loading lumber into the barn without being asked. They were working like people with something to lose, and that was new. Later that morning, Nokose walked into the cabin, dirt on her cheek and purpose in her eyes. She dropped a folded piece of paper on the table in front of Elias. "What's this?" he asked. "A message from Arla." He opened it. Short, precise handwriting. Careful ink. Creek filed an official claim against the boy. He's traveling to Ironwater, settling accounts, and he's looking for men again. You have 4 days, maybe 5. I suggest we meet. Elias folded the paper carefully. Is she still willing to help? She didn't have to send this. That says enough. He nodded. We'll ride out tomorrow. Just you, Elias said. This time we will go together. That afternoon, while Tama helped Nokose with the root cellar, Elias and Harlan sat outside repairing the fence. The former hired gun worked quietly, his hands practiced, but his movements still unsure, like a man trying to unlearn cruelty. Have you ever been to Ironwater? Elias asked. Once, Harlan said. Mining town turned outlaw wash basin. Half the men carry guns, the other half carry favors. Creek owns land there, he owns judges there. Same thing. Elias wiped sweat from his brow. He's trying to bury us legally this time. Harlan nodded. If he can't burn you out, he'll paper you out. But we're not going to let that happen. Harlan gave a small, dry grin. You sound like a man ready for war. Elias didn't smile. I'm ready for something to end. That evening they packed supplies. Ammo, dried meat, whiskey, the Henry rifle. Nokose sharpened her knives with a stone that looked older than the cabin. She didn't speak much. Tama sat by the fire, fidgeting. You're leaving again, the boy said. Elias crouched beside him. We are, but not for long. What if he finds me while you're gone? He won't, Elias said. You've got this place, Nokose and Harlan, and Mavis said she'd ride back up if we needed to. You're not alone. I don't want you to get hurt. Elias placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Sometimes a man doesn't fight because he wants to win. He fights because he can't live with losing. Tama nodded slowly, his lip trembling, but he didn't cry. He just said, I'll guard the porch. The next morning they rode out Elias, Nokose, and Harlan down the south trail through the thinning woods past the place where they'd buried the last of Creek's men. The air was warm, still, but the tension rode with them. Ironwater took a day and a half to reach. When it finally came into view, low wooden buildings, crooked chimneys, red dust streets, it looked more like a scar than a town. People stared as they passed. Suspicion in every doorway. Gunmetal glinting from holsters like teeth. They stabled their horses at the edge of town and made their way to Arla's office. It wasn't much, just a clean room above a tannery with wide windows and bookshelves that sagged under the weight of law and dust. Arla was waiting. Sharp-eyed, salt-haired, dressed in a leather vest over a pale cotton shirt. She stood when they entered. You're late, she said. News travels faster than mules, Elias replied. Arla didn't smile. She nodded toward the chairs. Creek's got the papers. The judge is prepped. But I've made sure the clerk misfiled the initial claim. It'll buy you 12 hours. That's enough, Nokose asked. No, Arla said. But it'll have to be. They laid out what they knew, what Creek wanted, what they feared. He's not just after the boy, Arla said after a pause. He's after the story. You let him win, and this whole damn region hears that blood means ownership and money means right. Elias leaned back, his jaw clenched. Then we tell a better story. She studied him. Have you ever testified only to God? And once to my mother. Well, Arla said, you better make this one count. Outside, the town grew louder as the sun dipped low. Horses clopped, drunks shouted, doors slammed. The creek was here. They could feel it. They left Arla's office and walked down the main street. Slowly. On purpose. And there he was, standing in front of the saloon like he'd never lost a thing in his life. Polished boots, clean coat, a gold ring on each finger. He saw Elias first, and smiled like a man who thought time was on his side. Redfern, he said, voice like oil over gravel. Didn't expect you'd come crawling to town. Elias didn't flinch. I came to bury your lies. Creek chuckled. Is that what you call the boy now? Elias took a step forward. I call him mine. That wiped the grin off his face. The men around Creek shifted, unsure, but Creek held up a hand. We settle this in court tomorrow, he said. You don't want it settled here. Oh, I'd love to, Creek hissed. But I want it legal. I want it on record. I want the world to watch me take back what's mine while you choke on dust and failure. Elias leaned closer. Then I hope you brought more than lawyers, because we're not walking away. Creek said nothing, just turned, and walked into the saloon shadows, swallowing him whole. Back in their rented room above the blacksmith's, Nokose paced. He won't play fair. No, Elias said. But he'll show his hand. And what if the judge's hand is already bought? Elias looked out the window toward the street below. Then we call his bluff loud enough that the whole town hears it. They didn't sleep much, because tomorrow wasn't just a hearing. It was a reckoning. The courthouse in Ironwater wasn't much just a square building with peeling paint and creaking floorboards that echoed like they resented every footstep. It smelled of old paper, cold wood, and rust. The kind of place where justice wasn't blind, it just turned its head when money walked in. Elias sat in the front row of the courtroom, with Nokose beside him. Harlan leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, eyes sharp. The judge, a heavy-set man named Whitcomb, hadn't looked up since entering, just flipped through the papers in front of him with bored fingers. Jebediah Creek stood at the plaintiff's table, clean-shaven, smooth-voiced, and dressed like a banker instead of the man who'd led armed riders into a homestead. Let the record show, Creek said, I'm here for my son. Blood. Legacy. Responsibility. The child belongs to me, and I have the right to claim him as guaranteed by the charter of this territory and witnessed by the court. Whitcomb grunted. And who speaks in opposition? Elias stood slowly. His voice was steady, but there was iron in it. I do. Creek laughed under his breath. And who are you to challenge a father's right? Elias looked at the judge, then the room. I'm not his blood. I'm not his kin. I'm just the man who found him half dead in the snow when his father left him behind. Whitcomb's eyes flicked up. I gave him food, shelter, safety, and in return, he gave me something I didn't know I needed: reason, purpose, family. He stepped forward slowly. Creek doesn't want the boy. He wants to win. He wants control. He wants a name on a piece of paper more than a hand on a child's shoulder. Creek interrupted. Objection to character assassination. Whitcomb waved him off. I'll allow it. Keep talking, Mr. Redfern. Elias nodded once. I didn't come here to ask for permission. I came here to tell the truth. That boy isn't a claim to be filed. He's a life. He's got scars that Creek never saw, nightmares he never heard, and strength he never gave. He turned to the gallery. A few townsfolk had come in. Arla stood near the back, arms folded, watching like a hawk. Elias continued. He's not mine by law, but he's mine by choice. And every day I choose him again and again. Whitcomb tapped the gavel once. Enough. I'll hear closing remarks and give my ruling at noon. Creek smirked, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. As the court recessed, Elias stepped outside with Nokose. The sun had barely warmed the street, and dust swirled at their boots. He'll sway the judge, she said. I can feel it. Maybe Elias said. But truth echoes longer than gold. She nodded. Tama knows who he belongs to. That's all that matters. They returned to the courtroom before noon. The judge shuffled in, cleared his throat, and looked over both parties. I've reviewed the documentation. Creek has guardianship papers and a birth certificate. On paper, the child is his. Elias felt Nokose's hand tighten around his. But Whitcomb continued, papers don't raise children. They don't hold them during fevers. They don't teach them how to shoot or how to sleep without fear. That's earned. The Creek bristled. Your Honor, sit down, Whitcomb snapped. He turned back to Elias. This court has no jurisdiction over souls, but I know a man's measure when I see it. The boy stays with you, Mr. Redfern. Case closed. The gavel dropped, and with it a weight lifted. Elias didn't smile, not yet. He just exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for years. Creek stood, fists clenched, face blotched red with fury. This isn't over. Elias turned to him, voice low. It is for you. Creek stormed out, pushing past Harlan, who didn't move an inch. Outside, the sky had cleared. The wind was warm now, and somewhere nearby a bell rang at noon. Back at the cabin 3 days later, the land looked different. It wasn't really. Same trees, same creek, same dirt. But something had changed. Elias sat on the porch with Tama whittling a piece of oak into a rough horse shape. The boy watched quietly, his legs swinging off the edge of the step. Did the judge really say I could stay forever? Tama asked. Elias handed him the carving knife. He said you already belong. Tama smiled. Inside, Nokose cooked stew. Harlan chopped wood near the barn. There was no tension now, just motion, clean, honest work that made your muscles sore and your heart settle. That evening they ate outside under the open sky. The stars blinked down ancient and indifferent. The fire cracked, and the smell of pine sap sweetened the air. Nokose raised her cup. To the roots, she said. Elias raised him. To choose. Tama raised him, filled with water. To home. They drank. Later, after the fire burned low and the moon climbed high, Elias sat alone at the edge of the porch. Nokose joined him, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Think he'll try again? She asked. Elias looked out at the land, the fence, the field, the tree line glowing silver. He might. She nodded. But we'll be ready, we always are. Silence for a while. Then she said, You could have walked away. Let him take the boy. It would have been easier. Elias stared ahead. I know, he said, but I don't want it to be easy. He turned to her. I want right. And that was it. That was the truth that had guided every step since the moment he saw a boy and his grandmother near frozen on the edge of death. This story was never about winning. It was about choosing what mattered, over and over, even when it was hard, even when it hurts, especially then. The mountain didn't give things freely. It asked for sweat, for scars, for sacrifice. But in return, it gave something deeper than comfort. It gave meaning. And as the firelight flickered on the logs and the wind curled softly under the eaves, Elias knew he hadn't just saved a boy. The boy had saved him too. Out here where law was thin and blood ran hot, where names meant less than actions and survival meant more than pride. They'd built something no court could ever own. Not a house, not a refuge, but a home. And tomorrow, the work will begin again. Fences, fields, fresh earth and aching backs. But tonight, the mountain was quiet. And that quiet finally felt like peace.